living in an artificially induced state of consciousness that resembles sleep. The poor and the underclass are growing. Racial justice and human rights are non-existent. We have been lulled into a trance. They have made us indifferent to ourselves, to others. We are focused only on our own gain. That is their primary method of survival. Keep us asleep, keep us selfish, keep us sedated.
You're listening to Toward Anarchy on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Here's your host, Michael Storm.
Welcome to the show. It is Toward Anarchy. I am your host, Michael Storm. That must mean it's Sunday. Well, at least it is in my world. I am live. It's 1 p.m. in the afternoon, Central Standard Time, and I'm just here hanging out on Republic Broadcasting Network. What a great idea! What a great plan! And it wasn't even, it wasn't that hard to do. Just kind of turned on the microphone, made sure the computer was on, made sure there's not a bunch of noise going on in the background, and here I am, ready to talk. Say hi. Find out how you're doing. Got a great show for you this week. I'm super excited. We've been doing this series with Dr. Dean Lloyd, and we're talking about the book Cruising the Epiphany Highway, and we're just sort of breaking it down and having some fun with it. The book itself is fun. It's a bit of a piece of art, if you will, as well as something of a self-help tool, and it's been fun reading along and following, and we've done some episodes here lately where grief and sadness and sorrow and loss are at the heart of the topics. We did the September 11 conversation with Francis Schur, psychologist, and talking about sort of the bigger that weird national loss and grief that we all experienced through 9/11 and trying to deal with that and some of the implications of the psychology on the individual and why they would choose to believe one way or another about the events of 9/11 and sort of at times just ignore the most obvious, and that's all part of that grief process. That's part of loss. That's part of change. That's usually not our own choice, I guess, would be a good way to put that. It's not something that we had control over and are not able to sort of turn on and off the action, something that we really, really have to learn to deal with ourselves internally. And then we had the conversation shortly after that with Craig Hargis talking about his brother and his trouble with alcoholism and how the fear of COVID and the state and the isolation that it's caused a lot of people. I'm seeing it now in my own mother. She was here this past week, and it's been the first time, I think, since COVID, since before the whole COVID thing, that we've had a chance to get together, and her mental health is not where it should be because of the isolation, and it causes panic and fear, and all of these things are all tied into this conversation that we'll have today. Dr. Dean Lloyd is back. We'll talk about Cruising the Epiphany Highway, and we'll talk about grief, and we'll just have that conversation about ways to deal with grief and some of the thoughts that are offered by Am Rosen in Cruising the Epiphany Highway. And as always, if you want to follow along, go to towardanarchy.com. Sign up for the email list. There's a link for it. It's right on the front page in between the most recent sort of information about the most recent show and the last show. It's sandwiched in the middle in there and moved a few things around over the last couple of weeks as I worked to add some more things and change things on the website. put your email address in there. I sent out the first email this week to the people that have already subscribed, and it already seems to be working well. I'm very happy with the tools, much happier than I was with the one that I had up there originally, and so this is really cool. It's still, I believe, the best way to stay in touch. I don't think there's any question about that, simply because there's not any. Well, there's all kinds of filters. I talk about the filters all the time that filter your information and sort of filter your world. And, well, they're right there. They even call them filters if you open up your email program and go in. You can put filters and apply filters, and they'll send things to certain folders. And so it can be filtered, but it's not in the sense it's you chose it. It's not like the Facebook scam where you go and you build community and you find all your friends and you connect with these people and you find like minds, and then they change the rules on you and say, no, you can't do that. You can't talk to those people. Those people can't have a place in our little empty lot that you guys are building up. All we did all the work in that. That's the thing about Facebook and all the social media, is that it's not theirs. I mean, they have this platform. And that's a good word, platform. And it's a big word that you hear all the time now, because everybody has a platform. Well, that's just the place to stand on. It's just an empty lot, an empty field, an empty building that has nothing in it until you take people and you put it in it. And if you build your platform on the auspice of creating community, the idea that people can come and associate with who they want to, and create the community themselves, and then you change that, you alter that you're substantially changing your own contract. They love their little digitally signed contracts. Agree to this, check the checkbox, and you agree to this. They love all of those things, and they serve their purpose. I'm sure they do, but let's face it, You screwed us. You screwed us. That's what Facebook did. It screwed everybody. And now they're changing their name. This is, everybody asks me what this is about, why they're changing their name. It's not like you can just move Facebook away from the negativity and still have Facebook. It's still Facebook. If they're not changing the name of Facebook, Facebook will still be Facebook. Instagram will still be Instagram, and whatever else that company owns will still be that. But what it is now there's an umbrella corporation, this Meta corporation, I guess. That's really, come on, Meta corporation, Meta in front of anything. And what I believe it is I believe that they're purposely doing that and separating the businesses so that the government doesn't come in and say, well, you own Twitter and you own Instagram and you own Facebook and you own this and that. You've created a monopoly in this social media area, and we're going to take that away from you, like they've done to Microsoft, and they did back to AT&T. They busted up the bells, and you had all the baby bells. That sort of thing is I imagine what they picture that they're headed for, because that's what I picture that they're headed for if they continue to do it. Government's going to force their way into it. And so I see it as a way to head that off by just breaking the companies up themselves and clearly separating each of those companies. I think that's part of it. There's more to it than that, I'm sure. They're turning the whole social media, Facebook thing into that place where you literally want to be plugged in like the Matrix all the time. That's their goal, is to create that second life and to begin the social credit scores. We talked about that before. It was that My Life or something like that had been following us around for a while there, trying to get information and get you to sign up for it. And I haven't seen anything from it in a long time, so I must have managed to block it out. But yeah, that's it's one of these things where you can go look somebody up by their social media score, and it's arbitrary garbage that is it's the same thing that you get in life across the board, whether it's employment or just that seems like the most obvious place, is it where you just you do these things and you it don't get recognized. You do your whatever it is, your job, and somebody else makes a bunch of noise, and they're the ones that get all the attention, be it good or bad. There's a whole thing in there. I don't know. It just popped into my head as I was talking about it, and I don't want to tangent off. I definitely don't want to do that, because we have a shorter kind of show. We usually keep Dean for the hour and a half remainder of the show. I'll just have this first little segment here to just chat about some of the things that I found interesting throughout the week, and convince you to go and get into the newsletter. That's what started the whole conversation there, was creating that newsletter and reaching out to you and staying in touch. And it's just, again, it's just that it's the best way to make sure that, well, you get the links and everything a little bit earlier than everybody else. Everybody else has to wait for the show or to hear it later, as one of the on one of those platforms out there, on one of those podcast platforms, and you'll already be that much further ahead. You'll get the email, and you'll get the links about VAERS COVID vaccine death data that it's been backlogged. You know what VAERS is? That's the reporting system for vaccine injuries, and they've exploded since COVID, and it's considered to be a minor percentage. And yes, there are questions about the data. It's another one of these things. It's literally what I was just starting to say, is this contribution of data that gets confused, and somebody gets, the person that makes the noise goes out there. So you do all this great work, you help all of your customers. I just have to do it anyway. You help all of your customers, and you don't get the reports, the good reports. You don't get those. They're not the people who are calling the boss and saying, "Hey, Mike did a fantastic job helping me solve my problem today." That's not. It's the 1%, the bad. That's the problem with this whole credit score, not credit score, people credit score, I guess, social credit score, it being so arbitrary and so open to drawing a negative response, because that's what happens. It's the loud and obnoxious, and it's one of the things, I guess, keep going, that I try to get you to remember to do. It's the like, the share, the follow, the subscribe. It's amazing how all this stuff just ties together. I don't even have to try. There's a thread through everything. Like, share, follow, subscribe, and to make sure when you're out there in these places where those scores, the likes and the shares and the subscribes and the follows, where those things matter, make sure that you're doing them to help those people. The network, Republic Broadcasting Network, when you see one of the great memes that we share, like the one from Candace Owens, it's not a meme. It was just a copy of her, a quote of hers that she sent out via Twitter or something like that, and it said, "Protect your children at all costs." I cannot say this statement enough. If you need to move, if you need to lose your job, if you need to pull them out of school, whatever it takes, keep them safe. That's Candace Owens. She said that. We shared that across the network, and thousands of people have seen it and liked it, and a bunch of people have shared it, and everybody thinks it's this. There's some good in there, and so you need to be able to do it. You need to like, share, follow, subscribe, and you do it do it with the thought that when you do it, you're doing it for that person, that group, Republic Broadcasting Network, Toward Anarchy, Michael Storm, Bob the Builder, whoever it is that you follow, whoever it is that you follow on YouTube, That's the worst place. I've showed you before where there could be millions and millions and millions of people who have listened to this song, and 100,000 people have liked it. I clicked it. Just take that one extra second to click that like that says get it. So there's this backlog blamed, and VAERS has the same problem in that sense, is that anybody can report to it. But that doesn't invalidate the data. It doesn't mean that when the guy calls up and says that you were a jerk to him over the phone and you didn't help solve his problem, it doesn't mean that that wasn't true. It's just the only one that's reported. So that's the you understand. I hope you get the analogy there. The very obvious similarity in that, and why it could be considered to be a better information, even though it's anybody can supply the information. What we don't get is we don't get the results after government is determined that somebody has been damaged by a vaccine. We don't get the results. That's the bigger problem. And I love it when people point out, well, anybody could report to VAERS. Yeah, well, what's the bigger problem? That anybody could be injured and therefore could potentially need to report to the system, or the other thing. It seems obvious to me. So there's a backlog in the reports of deaths, and there's a large number of missing reports, and it's based on this data that somebody smarter than both you and I has taken a look at, and it's in the number of deaths that they say versus what's been added to VAERS, and it's a decent little analysis. It's not a hard thing, but there's some links in there. It's good global research data. That's where I got the link from initially, and then inside the link, there's all the tons of data that clarify everything that they looked at, all the different results inside VAERS and the flaws that really prevent the system from working as intended. And we don't mean in the sense that we can't trust it at all. It's just in the same sense that the numbers are flawed, and you have to look a little deeper. You can't just take that surface number and accept its reality. You have to dig a little bit deeper, read more than just the headline. Go in, read the article, and click on a couple of different links. I don't know, there must be half a dozen different links to different data and information inside just the one story. And if you sign up for the newsletter at towardanarchy.com, it's down the right-hand side if you get past the front page and don't want to have to find your way back there. It's not that hard. But there's a big subscribe button on the right-hand side. It's right above where you can click to get a copy of Cruising the Epiphany Highway, where you can follow along when we're talking about passages and bits of information from inside the book, as opposed to our just sort of rambling on about what we read, which will happen as well. I'm talking about my guest, Dean Lloyd. He'll be joining us in about 15 minutes, not quite that long. We'll be calling him. Hopefully he's on the road. He's in the process of leaving L.A. for Little L.A. He's moving from California to Colorado, and having come from Colorado and seeing the way it's turned over the years and the leftist influence that is there. He mentioned that he was in the middle of that move, and that was just the first thing that came to mind. You're just switching big LA for Little LA, or LA Light, I guess is what I called it. It's still a beautiful place, and I don't necessarily dislike LA. There's a lot of people to dislike there. The fake people, the ones that you see on the big screen. Those guys. Those are the fakes. We'll come back and we'll talk about just a couple of more things before we invite Dr. Dean Lloyd into the conversation about grief. Man, that one seems easy compared to some of those songs. But it surprises me as I listen around to music and just find random songs to play with. There's songs that I know I'm familiar with the song, but I've never tried to play the drums to them before, and it surprises me how complicated some of the easiest sounding, it's not always the big heavy metal song that's the hardest one to play. In fact, some of those are easier to play because you're just in it. It's hard to explain if you're not if you're one of those persons who's never picked up an instrument and tried to play and tried to learn how to manipulate it and to make the different sounds that they can make and do the different things that they can do. You might not understand. If you are that person, you haven't. I don't care what age you are. I still encourage you to do it. I think you should. I think you would be amazed at the myriad of benefits of playing an instrument and spending time in that world, and it's in yourself. It's it's a physical thing. It's a mental thing. It's so much to exercise in that idea. TowardAnarchy.com. Look for October 31st. I'm live here. We do this every Sunday, 1 to 3 p.m. right across the Republic Broadcasting Network all around the world. And it's my pleasure to do so because I get to bring you people like Dr. Dean Lloyd, and we get to talk about something like grief, an important conversation. And we will add, I will give producer Sam the number here in just a second in this next break, and we will get Dean on the phone, and we'll start having this conversation. We'll find out what he's up to and what he's been doing and why he's moving and all that and all those interesting things I have to know the answers to too. But we'll have this bigger conversation about grief and about dealing with it and all the things that surround grief and why we have grief and if you want to follow along, you can get the book that we're looking at and that we're sort of taking some inspiration and thoughts and maybe some quotes and things from as we have the conversation. It's called Cruising the Epiphany Highway. It's all over the website at TowardAnarchy.com. You don't even have to go looking for October 31st or any of the other episodes that we've done. It's right there on every single page down on the right-hand side underneath the subscribe button, sandwiched in between the United Deep State of America, Shadow Government's Republic, that book by my friend Michael Howell that I've been sharing the link as well. So that's up there. Hey, I just made some money. That was great. Did you hear that? It was kind of subtle. I only barely heard it myself, but it picked it up. I just made some money, whatever it was. Let's see, what was it? That's nice. Oh yeah, I sold some cards. Hey, that's neat. It's always nice to just be sitting here and make some money. And it's just a quick $20 like that, no problem. Go to TowardAnarchy.com again, right down the right-hand side. You can get a copy of Cruising the Epiphany Highway, a digital copy. You can follow along just like I do, because I pull up the digital copy myself as we're talking about these things, make sure I have my quotes and my references and anything that is brought up in the right spot. There's some links I shared with you. I mentioned that VAERS COVID vaccine death data, that the missing reports and the backlog that's blamed for that. That information is there in a link. Also, about the holiday season, you keep hearing about shortages and supply shortages, and there's all these boats that are parked off the coast and all of our coasts. Apparently they're everywhere, and they can't find a place to dock and nobody to unload them and all these. This is the narrative anyway. And Walmart and Target aren't expected to have any problems this year. Their shelves are full. So the rich keep getting richer in that consolidation effort. Whether it's intentional or not, it continues. I think it's intentional. I think a lot of people do. I don't give a damn what others say. It's okay to color outside the lines. Jimi Hendrix says that. That's a quote there, as always. I just try to throw something up there. I always like that. Every website that I've ever built, and I've built a lot of them, and a lot of them doing something like this, where I'm trying to find a way to share links and important data like this, these things that we always talk about. It's been vaccines. It's been all this stuff for a couple of decades that I've been doing this and more. I've always liked that quote. Always liked it when there was just a quote. It would surprise you with something new, something different. And so I have a big collection of quotes, and I had for a long time a bunch of books that had quotes in them too, but they're so static and so hard to look through. So I've moved all that over to digital. And you can follow along towardanarchy.com. You can get those quotes, and we'll come back and we'll add Dr. Dean Lloyd to the conversation. We'll be right back. Anarchy.com. You must go there. You must look for October 31st. If you have to, click on that. If you're not live with me and it's not just right there on the front page, you should be able to click on the episodes and click on 2021 in October, and it'll be there. Or you can just search for it. That's an option as well. When you click on the episodes, there's a link to click the search button in there, and you could just search for Dean Lloyd. And I did notice something the other day that I thought there was one of the conversations that we have that didn't appear in there, and that bothers me. So I don't know. I have to keep my eye on that thing and watch for some more searches. It hasn't been up there for very long. I don't have a lot to search through, and so it shouldn't have trouble finding things. But Dr. Dean Lloyd pops up in there when you search for him. And as always, I share the links with you. If you want to find out more about evolving the species, the work that Dr. Dean Lloyd does, that link is there, evolvingthespecies.com. You can go there. You can find out more about Am Rosen. You can find out more about Cruising the Epiphany Highway as well. There's a direct link there to pick up a copy of that if you want to follow along as we sort of work our way through it and introduce people to the ideas inside it and talk about these things. Dean listens all the time. It's almost a little bit creepy. There's always somebody listening to me. He's great about sending a comment. Everybody, I get comments and things all the time, and I don't even know how to respond to them. A lot of times, I don't even know if I should necessarily. I just take the comment, the statement in stride, and try to consider it as I move forward, if there's any value to it at all. But Dean is listening to the show, and he hears me talking to someone like Craig Hargis, and he hears me having this conversation about this profound sadness and grief that Craig is experiencing over the loss of his brother. And it's been over this period of time, and you guys have heard me. I tend to process these things a little bit differently, and so for me, it can be a little weird trying to understand how other people. I'm sure it's this way for everyone. How other people are grieving and how they're dealing with grief. I'm going through it with my own wife right now. Her mother just passed away in the last few weeks. It's all around us all the time. It's a big conversation, and people don't know how to deal with it in positive ways, just like they don't know how to deal with a lot of things that lead to grief, like death. It's another one of those things that people don't prepare themselves for, and they don't have practice dealing with. And so, we'll tackle the one issue, grief, today. We'll have to do the death thing again. I'll have to have the Death Wives back on the show to talk about that conversation again. And I loved that conversation. I think they loved being here. And so I would make a mental note of that and come back to that conversation. But today, it's all about grief. And if you go to towardanarchy.com, look for October 31st. You can follow along. You see Dr. Dean Lloyd is my guest, and I believe I hear him moving around. I guess you're still in the truck. Are you still on the road? That's what's going on?
I believe the song On the Road Again is appropriate. The early years of my maverick life, I traveled from here to there. I was a very motivated young doctor, and I traveled quite a bit. And when I was on the road this time, it reminded me that there is still that spirit in me that carries over to the crossing the river attitude. You know, I want to learn what is out there, and we have to make that decision for ourselves constantly, whether we strengthen what we know, we stay on that side of the river, or we cross it. Right? Don't cross the river if you can't swim the tide. Another song, America, it comes to mind. But I was listening to you, and I was just now, and when you had that show 3 weeks ago, I think it was, with your guest who had that very powerful message about losing somebody, I wanted to jump right in there and talk to them about this, because we are facing the kinds of grief that we never imagined possible, with people being lost in so many just confusing ways. We don't know if they've died from the vaccine, if they've died of natural causes, if they've died from malpractice. All of these kinds of things are woven together. And sometimes we do have a clear understanding of why they died and what happened, and nothing we can do about it. In the case of your friend and his brother, I thought I might spend this first segment in defining for people what grief is and how it differs and how it's similar to the word depression. Grief is loss, in short. And it's most associated, if you're thinking of it in terms of Chinese medicine, it's mostly linked to the lungs. And in a funeral, you know, you're seeing people crying. That's the release. And it's something that we have been programmed in our culture to either find as a weakness or ignore. But you cannot make, and this is an important point, you cannot make physical changes in the body without making emotional releases. So crying, or laughing for that matter, is a release. Laughing is a mental release, and crying is a physical. So what we have with this tragedy that he had, with the grieving process, you make mention of it, and correctly so, that we process things differently. We process different, and we may see someone else overcome something that we ourselves haven't overcome. In other words, the death of a family member, maybe one of your siblings has already dismissed it, and they had a different relationship with their parent, for example.
Right.
You just mentioned the parent. And it's a different connection or a different grieving process. So what I wanted to do is give the tools that help facilitate healing in such a traumatic event. Right? That's not talked about. We're saying, oh, that's terrible, nothing to do, here, take some antidepressants. These are not solutions. I will provide those solutions, and I will also entertain questions that are intelligent, that take me into the depth of how we can, as a species, understand the mechanisms that we have to process and heal in an intelligent way without floundering and going all over with, just guesswork. And I have the unmitigating gall to say that I figured this out with my dear friend Dr. Rosen, and step into these things directly. And so I wanted to clarify, if I may, what grief is in this particular instance. Yes. Are you with me so far, Michael?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I don't have anything to add yet, but I will.
Jump in any time. I love questions.
No, absolutely. I just don't want to interrupt the flow of the thought. I mean, you said, I think, the most important part in explaining grief already, and that's that grief is loss. They're so closely tied together. That's why we have grief. It's because a perceived loss or real loss, and dealing with those things. Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't have a thing to change.
Okay, great. And I do love being challenged too. So in that particular instance with this grieving process he was going through, he knew his brother was in trouble. And
right.
Just to recap a little bit of this, he was an alcoholic, and alcohol is a depressant.
Mm.
Now let's take that word depression for a moment. It's epidemic in our culture, yet most people don't understand the word. Depression means several things, but I'll take the top three items that it's most closely linked to. Number one, it means being stuck. Now imagine you taking your hand, putting it in some malleable clay, that's wet. Do you remember when you were in elementary school and you made clay pots and cups and whatever with clay? You remember that as a kid and how you got your hand?
Oh, yes. You purposely stick your hand in there and try to get it to create that suction and keep you. Yeah, absolutely.
Or if you're past that stage and you're an adult and you go to the hot springs, you cover yourself in some of these places that I go to occasionally that have a mud pile, and then you just put it all over and then dry out, bake it in the sun. But think of your hand going into the clay and creating a depression. That is our mark, a depression. Now, there's two things. You've never met a depressed person that's full of vitality.
No, you get manic. That's a whole nother.
Yes. Well, you might be crazy. You might be babbling, nonsense, or just flailing limbs or whatever because of.
Well, but also at the same time, you don't have to actually be that to go through. People who are seriously depressed will go through those manic stages, and it is. I hate to say it, but it is just a step away from being the sort of kind of crazy that you're talking about.
Yeah, and our point that we want to make, you and I are bringing up a topic that isn't often discussed. Okay, how do you manage the grieving process, and what does it mean to us? Is this something that has us by the short hairs? I certainly hope not. But it is something to be excruciatingly honest about. Something is upsetting you, right, in this manner that you receive the emotion of grief. It's hard to breathe. Think of the lungs. You got to take a breath, right? And when you're crying, you have to take that deep breath, or what it is that's causing you to shut down the breath. All of us experience grief. That those that are listening to me can understand what I'm saying. We've all experienced it. What that means is that loss of what we had that gave us enjoyment, pleasure. We identified ourselves as being connected to. We are beings of a very unique type in that we are able to share our intellectually, and intellect, don't confuse this with the intelligence. Intelligence is not the intellect. Intellect is what we understand in the form of symbols. But we can share with each other intellectually, we can label and identify. The word grief, in its loss, in our body means that we don't have something that is giving us life, giving us enjoyment, giving us pleasure. People that we have, I'll say the word, love. And I'll appropriately throw in another song in that Leonard Cohen sang some years ago, that there ain't no cure, there ain't no cure, no cure And so we must honor in ourselves first the ability to allow grief to surface and to suppress it with drugs that don't resolve it and keep it buried. You know, that's what SSRI drugs are about, selective serotonin reuptake inhibiting drugs. And they're so extremely popular and very damaging, very harmful. But when people get too depressed, they feel they cannot handle what's involved. Now, don't get me wrong. There's a time and place for everything. But what people are entrained is to not honor their feelings to the point to others recognize it. Nobody understands me. Nobody gets it. I'm alone. Okay? That man that was an alcoholic reverted back to a pattern of fear that caused him to give up and be distracted and become addicted. That's why he was an alcoholic. There's a complex emotional patterns that are always woven into these things that say, I can justify drinking because I feel this way. Okay? Feelings can justify anything.
Yeah.
So already he was in his box -1.
Yep.
And there was no one that could reach him. Now I'm going to say something equally as important. And that is, in my practice over the years, as much as I reached out the olive branch to help people in ways that I knew I could help. I didn't think it. I knew I could help them. The one thing I couldn't give them, Michael, is the desire to heal. That's one thing nobody can give. And if that's decided, then the process stops for anybody. Because the most important thing in healing is what? Asking for help. So this alcoholic man needed help, but he didn't ask for it. And at that point, as much as it hurts me to see people that I care about hurting, I can't intervene. Unless it's an emergency.
You can't, right, yeah. No, you can try to stave off them harming themselves in an emergency situation, something like that. But yeah, otherwise you have to listen more than you have to talk. We got to go into a break. We'll come right back. And so grief is loss, and it's often profound. That's one of the reasons that we feel it, and it's profound because it's love. And what can you do to stop that love thing? You just love who you love, and it never dies. It always lives with you. My wife, just lost her mother here recently, and we're just talking about that idea that she's still there in the back of her mind. And I said, well, yeah, I mean that's where she will be, and she will exist in as long as you do, for sure. So the ghosts that haunt you in that case may just be in your own mind, and it may have to do with not processing grief the way that we should, because we're taught that things like crying and showing emotion, these are weaknesses. These are things that you don't do it, or it's not important. It's just you can get over it. Just let it go. Dean, you were talking about depression, and you were saying that there were 3 aspects to depression, and depression is so tied to grief that they're very, very similar things. And you got stuck. What were the other 2?
Okay, so yes, thank you. And to be more clear is that when we talk about the word depression and being stuck, we're talking about some kind of internal pain. Now, grief is emotional pain. It is because we're talking about 2 types of pain here. And all that pain means that there is blocked energy. It's not moving through us. It may take months, days, maybe it'll take a lot longer. Maybe it'll take years to overcome a loss. okay? And that typically will come in waves. Our body does not heal on command.
It's not like Wolverine. You just don't start immediately. There's no massive healing factor like that. It takes time.
And we are expected to go through these emotional waves to integrate and process the change in our nervous system. And it takes something very challenging to all of us, and that is the ability to forgive ourselves. Because that step means that we have to acknowledge that we were either A, not being honest, and we were allowing something to take our energy away from us. Because so often people will be in a group of wanting to negatively reinforce each other. What I want to do is break that cycle. And in the next segment, I'll talk about how we can do that.
Okay, you bet. Absolutely. Oh, perfect. TowardAnarchy.com to follow along. We'll come back and we'll keep going. We're talking about grief with Dr. Dean Lloyd.
You're listening to Republic Broadcasting Network, because you can handle the truth.
All righty, we are off into hour number 2, and we are talking to Dr. Dean Lloyd. Dean is he's doing this whole evolving the species thing. It's his lifelong work, and we're just learning about it as we go along. He's looking with me at this book, this Cruising the Epiphany Highway book, and it's this wonderful little piece of art, and there's all these wonderful little quips and thoughts and ideas, and it's a fun read, and it's an interesting read, and you get to learn a little bit about yourself, and it leads itself to these topics. This topic that we're having today, we're talking about grief and the loss associated with it, and how people deal with it. And it's not people don't deal with it well. We're taught that grief is a weakness, that sadness is a weakness, to cry is it's going to expose you somehow to everyone else and make them take advantage of you, as opposed to what it tends to normally do in most situations, is make you appear more human to the people around you and a little less robotic. It's terrible. It's a terrible thing. And now we're being told that we're not supposed to express our grief and our sadness. We're also not supposed to overexpress our emotions. We're not supposed to get angry. We're not supposed to deal with things like that. We're supposed to, that's toxic. We can't do that. Just another path that we'll have to have a conversation about, how people aren't properly processing, aren't dealing with it, and aren't in touch with themselves. And it's funny, because I was talking to a guy in my comic book shop the other day. He comes in all the time. He helps us out moving some of our bulk books in auctions, and he's been around the block. He's former military, and he's seen quite a few things, and we were talking about this very conversation and dealing with grief, and how people. The bigger part of our conversation is how we as individuals tune into ourselves, and how we went through a whole period of time in the 60s and 70s there, where everybody was tuning into themselves. They were, what was the quote, tune in, drop out? I don't know. It's something about taking acid and dropping out of society. At any rate, people were doing that, and they were getting our conversation was about people being too in tune with themselves and just sort of getting sucked into their own reality. We're not talking about that. I don't think there can be a space where you're too in tune with yourself. I think you can get lost in trying to learn more about why and who you are, and you end up finding yourself sort of digging a hole in a desert somewhere and spending an hour in that hole, just, I don't know, sweating and thinking and there may be some advantage to that, but I don't necessarily think that everybody has to do that. I think that's what you'll hear, a conversation like ours, and someone in the conversation will have done that, and it will be a thing, and they will tell you about how amazing it is to go trip and be in this state of mind and learn about yourself and learn about the world around you and some of these things that go unseen and unheard through our daily life. But I just want you to understand, you don't have to make that leap to understand yourself at all. You can do that by just spending a little bit of quiet time and listening to your own thoughts and taking them to heart. You're really giving yourself a clear space and time to just listen. Just listen. That's what ended the hour there, was that idea. You have to be a listener so often, more times, when you want to help somebody understand their grief and their loss. And you were talking about how pain is blocked energy and how it takes time to release those, and again, how all this
Right.
is in relation to depression.
But yeah, and there's as you mentioned before about how we'll have another discussion about anger. Just briefly, anger is when you don't know how you feel, and I'll talk about that at another
Not
time.
in touch with your feelings, yeah. All right.
Yeah, but this is the game that's being played right now, is to disconnect ourselves from our feelings. All right, how is that done? Oh, a number of different ways. In the case of this alcoholic brother who ended up committing suicide, that is disconnecting from, oh no, don't give me that pain. I can't. I'll do anything as long as I just don't have that pain. It is too traumatic, too much. That is a very complex, sometimes, issue with people, because they've been traumatized very often as children, and it leads into adulthood, and it runs them. It controls their life. Those traumas are subconsciously running them. And when we experience a loss, like a family member, or it might be something that was directly linked to our livelihood, like a job, like a lot of people right now are losing their livelihood. They put so much effort into it. They've invested so much time, the people they care about, and they're being forced on the basis of a lie to have to leave their career, something that is their livelihood depends upon. Grief
Well, and
happens.
so many people, their identity is tied to their career as well.
Exactly, and that was my other point. So let me tie the depression points together first. In that I mentioned lack of energy, right?
Right.
I mentioned being stuck, and I also mentioned being in pain. Now, if you lose your job, you can get pretty depressed. You can. This is my life. What am I going to do? How has this changed, me? What justification is there in doing such a thing? And that's an individual task. We have to decide for ourselves how we're going to approach these matters and move into it. What I want to talk about is the solution on how to catch yourself before it controls you. Because most people out there are given not only inaccurate tools, but destructive ways of dealing with their emotions. Distraction, I mentioned, right? Watching video games all day, or drinking alcohol, or something that causes you to be distracted. Now, I don't say it's a bad thing to do it once in a while, like go to a movie and, just disconnect from that space. But when you drink alcohol, you wake up the next morning, nothing's changed.
Yeah.
You haven't allowed your body to overcome. You've depressed it. You've caused the liver, and I'll go into a little physicality here. I want to explain something. The liver is think of it as the general of the metabolism, and it takes the alcohol and has to convert it into a recognizable component so that it can get rid of it, and that's vinegar. And then once it does that, it takes a lot of work for it to do that. But once it does that, then it can go through the process of getting rid of it. Now, whatever distraction you choose, whatever it is that you're choosing, it's still a distraction. And very often, it's harmful to the point of debilitating, meaning that this man who is an alcoholic didn't ask for help. He isolated himself, and he didn't because of his emotional pattern see that anybody could understand him. So one of the solutions is the one that you just brought up, is being the listener. But you can't let the negative pattern run the show. If you recognize it in yourself and you're being excruciatingly honest, you can recognize it by first verbalizing it. We all know it's good psychology to tell what our feelings are, right? We know that. But what is very, very few people have the ability to direct the energy away from being stuck in that place. And here's a couple ways of recognizing it. One is that if I say you're in pain, in any kind of emotional pain, but it's blocked energy, right? And it falls into the same category of depression, being stuck and without energy, depressed. Well, grief is one of the elements that is losing what you see as being extremely important. If I lost my leg, you better damn well bet that I'm going to be grieving. I am going to be sad that I won't be able to walk down the street without crutches or a wheelchair or something like this order. And that does happen to me, there's going to be a healing process that I have to recognize that takes precedence, and to honor that we have been given that ability to heal from grief means that we must first be aware of that's a physical pain, right? You know, your leg being cut off. My gosh, how severe, right? Well, the emotional pain is just as significant. And what has been leashed onto our country is the greatest emotional pain that has ever been experienced in generations of our life, and maybe the world's greatest emotional trauma ever experienced. I mean, wars are bad enough. Wars are insanity. But what we are experiencing now is what do we do with something we don't see in the injections that are being put into us, right? And that in itself is a grieving process, because we're feeling the planet in so much pain right now. And you mentioned the word in tune, which happens to be one of my favorite words. And just like the word obvious, my favorite word. So when you are realizing that you are experiencing grief, are you going to go to a distraction? Are you going to suppress that? Are you going to say, this is too much for me? Or are you going to, like you mentioned before, pause and be quiet with yourself and long enough? And we all need, Michael, some wholesome discipline. We need that, all of us. If it's yoga, if it's riding your bike, if it's playing your instrument, which you do, whatever it is. I personally love swimming, and it's one of my great releases, and I'm also a musician as well. So I find joy in hiking. And being active, I will put out there, is one of the greatest remedies for depression.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that you mentioned that, because it is one of the single biggest problems that we have in general in our current society, is the lack of activity and it just getting up. I mean, even just getting up out of a chair for a little while is a chore for some people, let alone making it a point to take a a time once a week to go for a hike with the kids and the wife or something along those lines. Just getting out and doing something. Yeah, stay active. Gosh.
And we all have to have that wholesome discipline. Now, if I'm to be challenged, which I would welcome anyone to challenge me, say, well, I had to have antidepressants to get me through a very horrible time. I know there's a time and place for things, but you don't want to stay on these drugs forever. You don't want to be an alcoholic. It controls you. When it has you by the short hair, it controls you. And I knew from a very early age, at 11 years old, I made a pact with myself that I would figure out the human condition, no matter what it took. I basically bet my heart, and I risked everything, and I won. I was able to figure it out with the help of my dear friend Dr. Rosen, who also had the same or similar path. We figured out what was involved with the human condition that caused these things, and we have tools, and that book is a major contribution to the evolution of humanity by recognizing what is in us that allows us to actually be human. We are so automatized. We are so robotic. We are so, we're programmed to be disconnected from nature. And our whole ability to become human again is to get reconnected to our feelings. That is a huge, huge problem, because our whole medical paradigm is built on scientific reductionism. It's always the next technology. It's always the next evolution of our ability to test things. Well, science is magnificent, beautiful for its measurement. That's what it does. But to be an integrated human, integrated individual, someone who has the ability to pick things up and put them down and understand what they're doing and why, that's consciousness. That is the big evolution. And in the category of nature of consciousness, I'll be talking about that in future shows. But in this one, I wanted to give everybody the reminder, if they've forgotten, that they do have the tools within them to make changes based on their decision.
I'm glad you said that.
Half of their battle. Go ahead, Michael. Yes.
Well, it's just that when we started this, I have my little notebook here that I write in during the week, and I'll make notes. I watched Dune. It was pretty good. And I saw Snake Eyes. It wasn't that great. I just some things. But as I'm sitting here, I have my pen and I have the notebook, and so as we're talking about this, and I jotted some things down, and it's amazing that you said that, because what I wrote down is, I wrote this down in two ways, in this weird flowing artistic. You would understand because you've seen Am Rosen's book. I'm prone to doing the same thing. We're talking about Cruising the Epiphany Highway, this book, and it's written a bit artistically, and it's very fun and can be challenging to follow even at times if you're not sort of paying attention, because it's not necessarily linear thought or constructed linearly. It's not a straight line from beginning to end. But I wrote down that we need tools to heal and process. And then the other end of that, I wrote, we have. And I wrote in a big circle, and they're pointing back and forth to each other, because it's not that we don't have these tools. It's not that we're not capable. It's that we need to be shown how to use them.
And that's what I'm here for, because we've been trained in an ineffective way on what to do with ourselves when we come up with an obstacle that appears to have power over us. Okay? And yes, time heals, but remember that part of our understanding requires that we go through the experience and allow the experience to take place.
Yeah.
You don't withhold your process to heal. Those are suppression methods. Those are avoidance patterns. We develop these approach and avoidance patterns, right? But we learn what our energy is most suited for, whether it's a type of music that we're favoring or a type of food. Oh, Chinese food. I love Italian. Maybe I'll have Italian tonight. Whatever we're favoring, that's part of our experience is to learn what gives us energy.
Hold that
and I'll
thought.
talk about
we got to
that.
go into. Okay, as soon as we get back from the break, that's exactly where we'll pick it up. Short segment. Follow along. Go to towardanarchy.com. Look for October 31st. We're talking to Dr. Dean Lloyd, and we're talking about grief, and we're looking. This is part of our adventure through Cruising the Epiphany Highway, and you can follow along with that as well. You can get a copy just at towardanarchy.com. On any page down the right-hand side is this little image that just says "Get your copy." It just flashes "Get your copy." Get your copy. Click on that. It'll take you right there. You can pick up a copy, and then anytime we mention specific things within the book, you can actually follow along, right along with us as we're talking about it, and find out where these ideas are within the book. But just before we went into the break, we were talking about this need for tools that we have. The real need is to learn how to use them. You had another thought.
Absolutely. Okay. When I don't want this to become, although there's a time and place for that too, spiritual cheerleading.
Right.
I'm talking about pragmatic,
Yes.
real solutions here.
Thank you.
And what I'm about to say next is going to seem so overwhelmingly simple that it would appear that I'm not speaking from experience, when in fact I've taken this to, I've ground tested it, I've field tested it, I've done everything I can, and it's psychologically infallible. And that is that whenever something feels good, move towards it. When it doesn't, move away. Don't run, move away. And approach your fears with caution. If you jump into things, most of the time you're going to lose energy without honoring your process. So this is a call to reminding us, in a part, that we have been bamboozled as a culture. We have been fooled, and the reaction, the knee-jerk reaction is, "Hey, you lied to me. I'm going to fight you. I'm going to come back, and we're going to." Well, what you need to understand is, what is it that you didn't see before? What is it that wasn't clear to you before you made that next step? You were given information, you made the best choices you could if you were intelligent about it, and then you proceeded according to what you knew then. Well, we now have new information. And the new information is, when you're dealing with an emotional block like grief, first be forgiving and allow yourself to go through the process of letting that loss go through you, whatever it is. If I mentioned I lost my leg, or if I lost, like in this case, your friend losing his brother, who he thought he really wanted to help. And Michael, it's been so many times that it hurts me to see people go through the pain that they go through, because they don't have to do it. They don't have to reinforce their frustrations, which, by the way, is blocked energy. another term that needs clarification. And that means that you see them go through this process, and it for me, it hurts me when I see them going through that kind of pain. And being skillful at knowing how to intercede or provide them support is part of the art form of healing. And that's another program that I'll be also offering up in later episodes, because the healing art that I'll be talking about and how you do that skillfully. Because you have to remember that if we're giving to people, if we're going out there and we're providing, comfort to people, we first have to know that it's got to be done in ourselves before we can offer it, and be skillful at it. The skillful giver isn't one that just frivolously throws money away at every charity or, every, political cause. You have to remember that you're not going to give to anybody until you give to yourself first.
That's a very good point, and it's another one of those simple things that a lot of people really overlook. It's unfortunate because we've been wired into doing things the hard way. We just have to do it kicking and screaming, and it has to be a battle. It has to be a fight. Well, it's a fight that we don't have to actually pick up we don't have to get involved in that battle. We don't need to, because there's nothing for us to win. There's the hint of the conversation that I had with Craig about his brother is that anger is misplaced. That's the point, and that was one of the reasons that I wanted to have the conversation with him, is that he doesn't have to go through that anger necessarily. That's not the same thing as following the loss through and following through on that grief. We'll come back and we'll keep going with Dean Lloyd.
You are tuned in to the Republic Broadcasting Network. Visit our website by going to republicbroadcasting.org.
Dean Lloyd is a facilitator and a healer, and he's a doctor too. If you like those degrees and pieces of paper, if you like to pretend that sitting in a classroom is the only way to learn how to do anything, I guess he has that too for you, if that satisfies you. But really, we're talking about some things that really everybody deals with, and everybody has, as we said, an innate ability to deal with them, barring sort of mental and physical handicap that keeps us from doing the key things that will help us get healthy in terms of dealing with grief and the profound loss that it usually speaks of. And we've mentioned a few of those ways. Go to towardanarchy.com, look for October 31st, and if you want to find out more about the healing arts, because that's what we're talking about here, Dean, you mentioned it just a little bit ago, and I was glad you did, because that was the first conversation that you and I ever had, some months back now, was about what are the healing arts, and we're literally practicing them right now, just trying to reach out to the audience and give them some hints and some clues. If you want to go deeper, you can do that. You can pick up a copy of Cruising the Epiphany Highway. A digital copy of it is easy to obtain just by going to towardanarchy.com, and on any page there's a link to it over there on the right-hand side. But there's also, if you look specifically for this episode and the information on this episode, it's October 31st. You find a link to evolvingthespecies.com, where you can find out more about the healing arts, what is evolving the species. You can find out about Dr. Lloyd and Am Rosen. You can also pick up, of course, Cruising the Epiphany Highway, and dive into it and read it. I don't know, maybe there's some hippie types out there. I'm reaching for something. It was a long way away. Old school hippie types that might find the book interesting, because it almost in a way reminds me of Woodstock Nation, Abby Hoffman. It's just sort of like rock and roll poetry. If you're an old school hippie, then you know what I'm not an old school hippie, but I know who Abby Hoffman is, and I own a copy of Woodstock Nation, and it's a interesting look at that individual and their world and the things around them, and it's done artistically, and it's done with a passion, I'm finding a great deal of joy in just getting to know you, Dean, and the things that you've done and your life's mission to sort of discover the human in all of us, and it's something that I appreciate. It's really cool to get to talk to you, but you're introducing me also to this other little world out here, Am Rosen and Cruising the Epiphany Highway, and these ideas, and I'm just enjoying it. I'm enjoying the ride, and I think that's one of the big solutions to grief is to remember that we are on this ride and that we need to enjoy more of it. We need to take more love and joy in the moments and the people that we have around us, and those are the ways that you have that foundation of people and love around you that allow you, that give you the room to deal with the grief and the hard things that come across in life.
See, you put your finger on the next point that I wanted to remind us, that where does our support group lie? You know, most people have found very recently that what we are going through as a culture is not done individually alone. You know, we are doing this together. This is such, and I want to remind, too, something that we alluded to earlier, is that those that are going through this grieving process, we have to remember our ability to tune in to our surroundings means that we are quiet in our mind.
Yes.
We can't have it busy, build up with so much in the thought. It's good to think. You know, I think all the time, but I don't think all the time. Okay? And what that means is that when we have a discipline, like we were talking earlier about being active, physically active, being also quiet, doing very purposeful meditation, purposeful breathing techniques. I have to meditate daily. I remember a time in my career when I first started out that I'd work 10-hour, 11-hour days, and I'd get home, and I had so much energy going out that I'd have to meditate before I'd be able to sit down and have my dinner. I literally would have to, it sometimes would take me an hour to get myself back, because all my energy would be so scattered in all these different places that my body didn't know what it was doing. It didn't know whether to read a newspaper, to take a shower. I mean, there were so many ways of being distracted. So I wanted to touch on two things while it's in my mind, so that it falls into this grieving process, healing. Because, and you mentioned earlier that, yes, I do have credentials, but I still consider myself a healer, facilitator, philosopher. I don't look at, and that took me a long time to be able to just say that, because I realized that this is the new evolution of our species. The doctor, you have such a wide range of the very competent in their field to complete idiots, overeducated idiots. And we have to understand that our minds may have a lot of parallels, but to be the healer in yourself, that is what I want to awaken in people. I want to show them and guide them with the tools that they hadn't been given at childhood on how to catch themselves before they start, developing patterns or are continuing to do patterns that are not functional, not useful, not helping them, right? So to stopping that, first you have to recognize and be excruciatingly honest, because what happens when you go into a raging fit? Your anger, you did this to me, you're the one that's causing me to feel so upset, you're the one that's... When you look at yourself in that manner, you're really just expressing a defended misunderstanding. Because if you understood, why would you have any reason to defend yourself?
It becomes such it's the first thing we all revert to now is that defensive stance. So it's built into you to go to the defense. Every time.
Now, if someone's attacking me, you better bet that I'm going to defend myself. Yeah.
Right, but that's completely different. Yeah, and it should be obviously different to the individual. What you get the anger is something that you can't control. That it's not. And if you can control it, there's no point in getting angry. You just control it then. So you get angry, it's something out of your control. You break things, you hurt people around you with that anger. We have to. That might have to be the next conversation.
This an easy. But this is why I'm saying is that the process of healing is allowed.
Yes.
In an emergency, you may have to force a person. For example, if they're coming with myocardial infarction in a hospital, you should, at least part of protocol, administer magnesium immediately, along with the medication, if you're doing your job properly. So if they're in an emergency, force is required. But healing is ultimately allowed, which brings me to the point of what is the weakness side of us. Well, we give in to people who don't, there are a lot of people that are in positions of authority that don't belong to be there. Can you agree on that?
Yeah.
I think your show speaks to it more than any other on RBN. But being that the case is that we cannot allow people that don't know what's going on run our lives. That's the bottom line. And it's sympathy. Sympathy is it's got the foundation in being weak mentally. You being sympathetic, I prefer the word compassion. Because compassion means you feel for that person. You have a connection with that person, and you're doing this together with that person. That's what I would like to see. If you have compassion for somebody, rather than being sympathetic, it means you buy into their trip. And I don't buy my own trip. If I bought my own trip, I'd go crazy. I have to, I have to remember that I'm still learning. As much as I've evolved, as much as I've been able to put things together, I'm still learning myself.
And you appreciate it when people notice that about you too, because it's funny because it happened to me just recently. Because I absolutely consider myself a student of these things, and I'm reaching out to people all the time, and so they're looking up information about the show, and they find the little write-up that I did about myself in the show, and the first thing that I say really about myself, other than my sort of professional qualifications as a broadcaster, is that I'm a student of these things that I'm talking about, these things that end up being central to a lot of our lives, including the politics and the economics and things like that. I am still learning all the time, and I will be the first to admit it. And I know that when I run into somebody who isn't still, that doesn't still have that gleam in their eye, that they want to learn and they want to know, and that they're still finding out the world about them, I tune out real quick.
Well, that's part of our job, is to be skillful at energy direction. See, half of healing is getting away from an illness. Oh, tennis elbow, I had that. Oh, man, I was in pain for 3 days. It's so good to be out of that pain. Well, that is good. You put on the analgesics, topical, and you got maybe some physical therapy or some massage, and you loosened it up and you recovered. That's great. But the other half of healing is knowing where you're going. Where are you putting your attention? Where are you headed? Where are we headed? Okay? And as much as I would love to be in charge of the American Medical Association, they would all be, they'd run so far away from me so fast, because what I would be doing is I would be exposing them.
Well, putting a lot of them out of work.
I would be calling them on what they're saying. I'd say, how do you know that? Show me what it is that gives you the authority to say what you're saying. And I would be the biggest thorn they'd ever experience, because I know what I would be saying would be asking the appropriate question. And I know how to ask those questions. Most people, when they come to me, and this is no boasting. This is just because they haven't been taught. What I want to do is provide patient the ability to see the question first. And if they can originate it, excellent. Love it. Bring it on. But if they can't, I want to lead them into a question that they would be able to ask themselves. Why are they doing what they're doing that's not appropriate, adequate, or effective? What is it that's not giving them the satisfaction that they need? And when we experience these sudden, perhaps, or maybe they're drawn out traumas that are causing us to grieve, then that's part of our own natural process of healing. So let's be mindful of it first, and then realize that we will get through it, provided we have aim. We have a direction that we're going, and that we're moving in a place that's better, rather than anybody that says something to me, Michael, that's negative. I'm very suspicious, no matter what it is. You're not going to have a good sleep tonight. Oh, really? Well, I'm working late, but I'm going to make the best of it. In other words, anybody who tries to convince me that I shouldn't feel good about myself doesn't know what they're doing.
No, I like that. I'm the same way. I cringe when people air negative thoughts. It's a thing. I see it all the time. There's no question about it. I run up against it all the time. I think we all do, and I don't know if we pay enough attention to it or not. Many of us are guilty of doing it as well, of putting out these, just setting ourselves up with a negative outlook on things. I reference it all the time in conversations on the show, and that's sort of arguing from the losing side. It's the same thing to me. Yeah,
they don't have a place to go. Have you noticed that?
Yeah,
you need to and do what you.
No, go ahead.
Well, you make the point in that this ties into all the negative emotions, okay? And grief and anger and fear, guilt, shame. I mean, whatever negative emotion that you're having, that's not understanding. Your body has to go through these experiences. See, we've been given. I personally feel like it's either you're on this planet to be cursed or blessed. And as much as many times as I felt that I've been cursed, I ultimately end up feeling blessed in the end.
Yeah, I walk around saying I lead a semi-charmed kind of life. I love that song.
Yeah, and it's like Dylan said, if you ain't busy being born, you're busy dying.
Yeah. No, these are all sort of just little quips and just simple thoughts that really, they're the kind of thing that will get me through the day. Just remembering
and it'll
those
drive it
simple
home
ideas.
For you, Michael. It'll drive it home, and that's where we need to come back to our heart center and be centered with each other. And I'll help you with that. I'll talk briefly next week.
All right, yeah, we'll have just a couple of minutes to wrap it up. We'll be right back. Okay, unfortunately, as always, it must come to an end, so we're down to the last couple of minutes here. And it's always a great conversation, and we'll pick it up again. We'll do another topic again next month. We'll pick another. I'm sure it'll come just as naturally as this one did. It was just so easy. It's such a thing to talk about it, and it's just one of those things that everybody deals with, and we don't want to in any way trivialize anybody's individual experience in grief or their own personal emotions and the things that they've had to deal with. But there is a obvious and working set of tools and methods and ideas, and I think I think we've managed to express the core of those, and that's just sort of taking that quiet time, listening to self, listening to others, talking to others, pursuing happiness, staying active, staying in tune with the things around you. I don't know if I'm leaving anything important out. Cap it off for us.
Well, yeah, just to complete the summation, in that clip you were playing, I'd like to comment on number one. Oh, you're number 6. You're a free man. That little clip you played. Well, I like to see it as there's only one of us here, and if you like it in me, you like it in yourself. Right? If this means that we challenge each other, then realize when you are not being honest with yourself. What is the big challenge for most people is that they're not connected with their thoughts and their feelings in the same way. They may think something, but they feel something else. And that is something I'd like to talk about next month. And bringing that up, it's very clear to me that we need to free up the nervous system so that we're no longer controlled by these primitive emotional patterns. And to do that requires some very deep discussions, I will have to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Because one of the problems with this is that the controllers, the people that are doing this to us, they know how to push those buttons, and so it's
not for me.
Well,
I don't have any buttons.
Right. Well, you get rid of the buttons, and they can't control you anymore. You cut the strings, as it were. Absolutely. Yeah. No, that would be a fantastic conversation for next time. As always, I truly love speaking with you, and I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate you, and I appreciate you bringing it here to the show and to me and letting it, get out there through me, because I find a great value in the things that we're talking about and the things that you're doing and in you, and that's not easy to find.
Thank you. Thank you. Humanity is ready, and I'm ready for this.
Thank you so much. We'll talk to you again next time, Dave. And next week, a very special show, a Hollywood Insider. That's the plan. We'll talk to you then. Take care.